Have you ever met a person who radiated evil? What were they like? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Extreme narcissist. This guy sent emails to me and my boss about my poor work performance while I was sitting at my dying mother's hospital bed. When I returned from that trip a week later, he was literally standing in my office with a tape measure. Apparently, he took my absence as an opportunity to take my office permanently. I have a higher job title than this guy to top it off, and no, he didn't get the office. I went to pick up a takeout order at a restaurant bar near me. I walk inside, and there's a guy standing by the door also waiting for his takeout order. He never said a word, just stared at me the entire time he was waiting. My gut told me I was unsafe. The cashier gave him his food, and he stood there for a minute or two like he was thinking of a reason to stall. He asked the cashier for another order of wings. I texted my husband and asked if he could pick me up because this guy was giving me the creeps. As soon as my husband arrived, creepy guy said, "Actually, I think I'm fine with a dozen. You guys enjoy those wings." And he left. I get the chills thinking about how I could have potentially been mugged or worse if I didn't listen to my gut that night. There was this guy who grew up in the neighboring streets as me, and he was just a really bad person. It probably doesn't sound like much now, but when he was about 11, he'd do things like borrow video games, never give them back, and then just swear blind he never borrowed them in the first place. This sounds minor, but it kind of went from there really. As he got older, he starts to steal money, beat the shit out of people for no reason, etc. His ex-girlfriend took out a restraining order on him after they broke up because she was frightened of him. The best example I can give of what he was like was when he heard that someone had said something about him that he'd taken offense to. The person who'd done this was in the pub one afternoon with his wife and kids, and this guy walks into the pub, doesn't say a word, and just headbutts him in front of his family. But at the same time, he could be quite well-spoken and charming when he wanted something from somebody, and it's only recently occurred to me that he's obviously a sociopath. He's now living in a tent and addicted to heroin, and I think it was always going to go that way. My senior year in high school, I was taking an art class. Most of the other students were juniors or seniors. In the middle of the school year, we had this freshman kid join the class. He would sit at the same table as me and my friends in the class. Our art teacher was cool, and we had a door that went outside to the side of the school that she would let us go out and smoke cigarettes. One day, sitting at the table, the kid says, "One time I ate 4 cigarettes. Like, what? We just thought he was a weirdo. I was going to the restroom one day from the art class, and I go out the hallway and he's opening the janitor's closet, looks around and goes into the janitor's closet. Being all sneaky like, I don't know, how he didn't see me, or maybe he just didn't care if I saw him go into the janitor's closet. I have no idea what he was doing. I just thought he was being weird." Couple months later, he's gone. Front page of the newspaper is an article about him being sentenced for raping a 3-year-old girl. Come to find out, the school was very aware of this and had put him in our art class so the teacher could keep an eye on him. The worst part, in the paper, they quoted him as saying she was asking for it regarding the rape. How the hell is a 3-year-old going to be asking to have sex? Like this kid thought he could get away with it or something? This dude was whack. I was just a kid, and my parents were visiting my dad's mom and half-brother. During our visit, my parents' siblings and I took a trip to visit a man-made lake that my dad was curious about just out of town. While driving around it, Dad noticed his ex-stepdad's truck, and he pulled over to see if he was around. Out popped my ex-grandfather and smiles as he embraced my dad. I had never met the guy, but had heard a lot about him and knew that him and my grandmother had been divorced for a number of years. While ever curious about this man that was in half of my dad's years, I hopped out of the car to say hello. Just half a meter away, I felt pressure around my body and instantly felt the need to be alert. Frightened by the sensation, I grabbed onto my dad and timidly said hello before my dad quickly ended the conversation and took me to the car. A few years later, after reminiscing on memories, Dad told me he remembered that experience and told me that he noticed I felt the man's evil aura and he felt the need to protect me. A little while later, as an adult listening to my dad and his siblings talk, I learned that he had been in prison for sexual assault and that he also sexually assaulted his children. For all I know, There's probably more disgusting things he's done that I have not been told, but his children that still hold his family name are in the process of taking on the surnames of my grandmother and her relatives, so they don't have anything that associated with him. Honestly, really glad that I learned all this in a timely way and that my dad had enough sense to notice I was uncomfortable. He was extremely nice and polite, but way too interested in talking to my daughter. Ended up telling her to scream if he ever tried to speak to her and to never go around him, and telling him that he had no business coming anywhere near her. He was my aunt's husband, and they were staying at my grandma's house while waiting for their house to be ready. Once they moved out, my cousin, his adult stepdaughter, admitted that he used to talk to her about her vagina on a daily basis and tell her that it smelled good. He absolutely radiated evil no matter what he looked or acted like. He also kept asking about our dogs. What would they do if someone broke in? They will attack just like they're trained to do. What if someone had a weapon? Well, so do I. And my 4 guard dogs can smell you before you ever get in the door. We changed to better, stronger locks. Years back, I was working on a mural project with a non-profit. Part of the gig was 1 day a week to teach the 7 to 12-year-olds art class. There was an 8 to 10-year-old brother and sister in one group. The brother bullied the sister mercilessly. No other kid would get near him. They all knew he was trouble. We separated the two, but once your back was turned, he was right back hitting her and even biting her. The last straw was when he took a newly sharpened pencil and straight up stabbed her in the hand. There was screaming, crying, blood everywhere. They called the parents, but I insisted on her being taken to the hospital as the pencil was halfway through her hand. The brother had no remorse, and even a smirk on his face. His eyes were very dark and dead-looking, like in shows where they show a pic of a killer and people describe them being dead-eyed. The ambulance comes as the parents get there. This is clearly not the first time something like this has happened. Because they didn't complete the activity, the nonprofit wanted the 2 back in the next week. I flat out refused, which caused a big deal. I put my foot down and wouldn't relent. I told him that kid needs help, and so does the sister. Later on, the coordinator told me that the year before, they had to take away his drawings because he would draw pictures of kids bleeding and drew dead animals. Like, how many warning signs do you need? That kid needs help. I work in a K-12 school. Met a kindergartner whose eyes were just soulless. He wasn't rambunctious like the other kinders, calm and steady, but bad things always happened around him. Grade 3, he faked a murder scene in the forest behind the school and would take kids back there to freak them out. In grade 10, there were stories of him planning a school shooting. He was expelled and charged, but I believe now the charges are dropped. I have never once felt comfortable with him in the room. He's still a minor now. I'm worried about what he will be like as an adult. In all my years, I've never met a kid like him. We tried several social interventions on the school level. He was good at always giving the correct answer without any emotional response. There was a soldier in my unit who was continual F-up, always in trouble. He had gotten a few Article 15s and things were moving towards general court-martial. He was restricted to post. So, he decided that was the perfect time to hop in a car after drinking a bit too much, go roaring down a tiny rural road at about 70 and hit another car head-on. He lived. They didn't. And he had absolutely no remorse. No remorse when he was recovering the hospital, no remorse while in pretrial confinement, no remorse when the verdict was read, no remorse when they put the cuffs on him and put him in the van that would take him to Leavenworth. In fact, he was spouting off about how the army screwed him over. F that scumbag. In high school, I helped my friend babysit a group of kids for a local church. The adults were doing some kind of Bible study, and there were about 6 to 7 children between the 2 of us babysitters. The main couple that was heading the group were the pastor of the church. The husband seemed a little weird but mostly gave off pushover vibes, whereas the wife immediately made me feel uneasy. Something about her seemed off, like she was there but not entirely aware of other people or something, almost like she would be saying and doing everything in the exact same wooden way with or without anyone else there. This couple had 3 adopted kids, and one was a 5-year-old Russian boy that the mom literally referred to as the orphan a few times. She told my friend and I very blankly how we can't give in to his demands because he has little orphan boy syndrome, so don't give him any snacks or any privileges when he asks. This little boy definitely had some psychological and possible developmental issues, but was honestly one of the more endearing kids in that group, and was nowhere near as creepy as the mom or the other two siblings made him out to be. The other two kept him at a distance and wouldn't directly speak to him, but would talk to us to communicate with him, like staring me down with tunnel vision and telling me Victor needs to stop playing with his napkin, as Victor was right next to them trying to tell them something and waving his napkin at them. When the parents finished their Bible study, the dad came back in first and played with the kids, including the Russian one, and he seemed like a genuinely kind person that loved the kids. Then, when the mom entered the room, the entire dynamic shifted, and the dad and two kids stopped interacting with the Russian kid and became much more formal, and the mom immediately began lecturing my friend and I about how the Russian kid was not to be playing with his sister's Legos. She said something to my friend about how this is the burden God has given this family, and we must follow through with it now. This poor little kid definitely seemed to have issues, but the mom struck me as being an insidiously sadistic and abusive person. The way her voice never changed tone and her facial and bodily expressions and movements never wavered gave me the biggest case of the creeps. I wish my friend and I would have known better then and had reported this to CPS. I've always had a bad feeling about the situation and wish I would have acted better to help those poor kids. The mom seemed like she could have strangled one of them, then calmly kept making dinner, as if absolutely nothing had just happened. My dad, after a particularly bad fight with my mom, where he ended up beating her nearly unconscious, he kidnapped my brother and I when we were toddlers while trying to avoid arrest. Not sure if my mom didn't charge him or what. As we were growing up, he started to beat my brother and I as well. He would act normal in front of his friends despite hitting us moments before they saw him. When I was 18, he tried to beat my brother, who was fighting back and not allowing the beatings to happen now that he was older and bigger. And when my dad started losing the fight, he broke a beer bottle against the wall and tried to stab my brother. I grabbed the pocket knife I was carrying and told my dad I'd stab him if he came any closer to my brother. My mom finally called the cops, and they charged him with assault with a deadly weapon. The police sent him to a mental hospital for a week's evaluation as my family began packing our things so we could move in with other family by the time he was home. My entire family called the mental hospital and told them to be extremely careful when evaluating him. He had successfully manipulated people his entire life. My family packed our things and moved in with family he had never been met before. 3 days later, the mental hospital released him on good behavior and because he made a few cards to my mom explaining how he was going to be better and how he was sorry. On the way home from the mental hospital, he spotted by a hardware store and bought multiple knives, a saw, and some rope. He put them in his backpack on top of his card, saying he was sorry and that he was going to be better from now on. He came home to an empty house unexpectedly. He messaged every family member asking us to forgive him and come home so we could talk things out. None of us responded. He used the rope to hang himself once he realized his plan to murder us had completely failed. I told this story before. Back in February 2003, I was living in San Diego. My son was a toddler at the time, and we'd like to go to the zoo or other places to check out animals and stuff on Fridays, my day off. That day we were driving around Lakeside, California, where they have a lot of farms with horses and cows, etc. As we were driving back that afternoon, I pulled up at a stop sign in front of El Capitan High School. In front of me to the right at the corner was a man in flowing robes and long, unkept hair. He looked like a religious prophet of some sort. Typical California, nothing to see here, right? Then this guy turned to face me, and I saw pure effing evil coming from his eyes. I'm getting chills writing this right now. All these years later, I can still see it. It's effing creepy as hell. Anyway, this guy was Brian David Mitchell, also known as the sick F who kidnapped Elizabeth Smart. Crazy, deep, angry eyes. I pulled on past him, drove home, and thought nothing of it until Elizabeth was rescued a month later in Salt Lake City. Then the story came out that he had her locked up in the hills in the little town of Lakeside, California. This kid at my music camp when I was in middle school, he didn't really talk to anyone and always played his cello very aggressively. Rumor had it that he kicked a girl in the mouth for taking his pencil. That kind of kid. Fast forward a few days, and I'm hanging out with my two friends at the waterfront, and we see him throwing rocks at something. We ask what he's doing, and he tells us that he's trying to knock a turtle off of a log. A few tries later, he clocks it in the head, and it falls off. That same day, he went up to a bunch of girls who found a tiny toad in the sand and asked to hold it. He apparently tried to crush it, but they took it back. The next day, he's at the waterfront again, poking something with a stick. My friend and I investigate, and he's poking a snake. I knew that it was poisonous, so I told him to stop, but he whacks me in the arm. A counselor ran over to break it up, but understandably forgot about the whole thing when we saw the snake, and just got us safely away from the snake. Worked with this guy who was very outgoing, and most would describe him as nice, but a little odd. He always made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and avoided him when I could. A work friend asked why I was rude to him, and all I could say is that he gave me the creeps. He never did anything specific or say weird things. It was just odd vibes. His wife and he killed a little girl they adopted, beat her to death. Trust your instincts. I grew up under the thumb of an abusive mother. TW, this is violent. I remember very starkly the first time she choked me. I don't remember what set her off, but she grabbed me by the back of my neck and threw me across the room, and I landed on my back. Had a coughing fit because of how hard I hit the floor, and while coughing, I felt hands wrap around my throat. Opened my eyes to see her crouching over me, choking me. Her face was all twisted, but her eyes were different. Her eyes were all squished up in anger, but her actual eyeballs just seemed blank. She was so angry and so devoid of emotion at the time. She just watched me sputter. I wound up passing out from her choking me. She left me there to wake up alone. I had bruises for a few weeks, a bruise all over my back, and a voice was gone for at least a week and a half. She never addressed it. I was maybe 8. I'm safe now. Yesterday was a year since I cut contact, but I'll never forget that experience.